Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and felt the warm air of Velhar Prime hit his face. He had been in space for 3 weeks, and the feeling of standing on solid ground again made him smile. The sky above was orange, not blue like Earth, and 2 small moons hung visible even in the daylight. Strange birds with 4 wings flew overhead, making sounds like broken wind chimes. A tall figure waited for him at the landing pad. The creature stood on 2 legs like a human, but that was where the similarities ended. Silver fur covered its body, and its face looked like a mix between a cat and something from a nightmare. Sharp teeth showed when it opened its mouth to speak. The eyes were bright amber and watched Jake with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Ambassador Morrison," the creature said in perfect English. "I am Threx, your coordinator during your stay on our world. Welcome to Velhar Prime." Jake extended his hand for a handshake, then remembered the briefing documents he had studied. The Velhari did not shake hands. Instead, he placed his right hand over his heart and bowed slightly. Threx seemed pleased by this and returned the gesture. "Thank you for having me," Jake said. "I look forward to learning about your people and exploring how Earth and Velhar Prime might work together." Threx made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "Work together? Yes, that would be interesting. Come. I will show you to your quarters, and then we must talk about the current situation." They walked through the spaceport, and Jake could not help but stare at everything around him. The Velhari moved with grace, their bodies lean and muscular. Most wore simple clothes that seemed designed more for function than fashion. The architecture was beautiful, with sweeping curves and tall spires that reached toward the orange sky. But Jake noticed something else. Many buildings showed signs of damage, burn marks on walls, broken windows. Fresh construction where something had been destroyed? "What happened here?" Jake asked, pointing to a collapsed structure. Threx's tail twitched. "A disagreement between 2 merchant clans. They both wanted the same location for their business. Neither would compromise. It became violent. Over a building location? Over many things, Ambassador. Our people are brilliant, but we have one great weakness. We cannot cooperate. Every Velhari wants what they want, and they want it now. Sharing is not in our nature. Compromise is seen as weakness." They reached a tall building near the center of the city. Jake's quarters were on the 10th floor, with large windows that showed a view of the surrounding area. The rooms were clean and comfortable, with furniture adjusted for human proportions. Someone had done their homework. After Jake unpacked his few belongings, Threx invited him to sit and talk. The Velhari's face became serious. "Ambassador, I must be honest with you. The Galactic Council sent you here at a critical time. Our world is close to tearing itself apart. There is a moon that orbits Velhar Prime, rich in minerals that we need for technology and construction. 2 major factions both claim exclusive rights to mine this moon. The northern clans say it is theirs by ancient treaty. The southern collective says the treaty is invalid and they have equal claim. Can't they share the mining rights?" Jake asked. Threx looked at him with confusion. "Share? I do not understand this word in this context," Jake frowned. "Share means both groups use the resources. They work together and both benefit. But if both groups mine the moon, each group gets less than if they had it all to themselves. Why would anyone agree to get less? Because the alternative might be getting nothing at all. Or worse, war." Threx's ears flattened against his head. "War is already coming, Ambassador. Both sides are moving military ships into position. They will fight, many will die, and the winner will take the moon. This is how it has always been with my people." Jake spent the next week meeting with various Velhari officials and observing their society. Every meeting was tense. Velhari did not seem capable of having a calm discussion. They raised their voices, showed their teeth, and often walked out in anger. He watched council meetings where nothing was accomplished because everyone wanted to talk, and no one wanted to listen. But the strangest thing he witnessed happened on his 5th day on Velhar Prime. Threx took him to a public park, a beautiful space with purple grass and trees that grew in spiral patterns. Velhari families were there, and Jake noticed several young cubs playing near a fountain. 2 cubs, both with gray fur and big golden eyes, were fighting over a toy. The toy was some kind of holographic puzzle that created shapes in the air. One cub had it first, but the other wanted it. The second cub jumped on the first, and they rolled around on the ground, hissing and scratching at each other. The sounds they made were horrible, full of anger and frustration. Jake started to move forward, thinking he should help, but Threx put a hand on his arm. "Do not interfere. This is normal." "Normal? They're hurting each other." They are young. They will learn who is stronger. The winner keeps the toy. Jake watched as adult Velhari walked past the fighting cubs without a second glance. Parents saw their children fighting and did nothing. Eventually, one cub managed to grab the toy and run away. The other cub sat on the ground and made crying sounds, a high-pitched wail that hurt to hear. This is how cubs learn about life, Threx explained. The strong take what they want. The weak must accept their loss. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about those two cubs fighting over a simple toy. He thought about all the broken buildings and the angry meetings. He thought about the two factions ready to go to war over a moon. A pattern was forming in his mind, something important that he was starting to understand. He pulled up his computer and accessed the cultural database on the Velhari. He read through hundreds of pages of information about their history, language, and customs. He was looking for something specific, and the more he searched, the more certain he became that he would not find it. Finally, at 3 a.m, he confirmed what he suspected. The Velhari language had no word for sharing. There was no word for taking turns, no concept of waiting your turn or letting someone else go first. These ideas simply did not exist in their culture. On Earth, human children learned these concepts before they even started school. Parents taught toddlers to share toys with their siblings. Kindergarten teachers made children take turns on the playground equipment. It was so basic, so fundamental to human society, that adults forgot it was even a learned behavior. But the Velhari had never learned this. In their entire history spanning thousands of years, they had never developed the idea that resources could be shared, that waiting your turn was possible, that cooperation could benefit everyone. Jake leaned back in his chair and looked out at the orange sky, now dark with night. The two moons hung above the city, peaceful and beautiful. Somewhere up there, military ships from two different factions were preparing for war. Down here, cubs fought over toys while adults watched and did nothing. An idea was forming in Jake's mind. It was so simple that he almost dismissed it. But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Maybe the solution to the Velhari's problems was not complex diplomacy or trade agreements or military intervention. Maybe what they needed was something much more basic. Maybe what they needed was a lesson that human children learned in kindergarten. Jake opened his computer again and began writing a proposal. He would need to convince the Velhari High Council to try something they had never done before. He would need to show them a concept so foreign to their thinking that they might not even believe it was possible. But if it worked, if he could teach an entire civilization what human children learned before they turned 5 years old, then maybe he could prevent a war. Maybe he could save the Velhari from themselves. It was a long shot, but Jake Morrison had not come to Velhar Prime to play it safe. He had come to make a difference. And tomorrow, he would start by asking to speak to the High Council and show them something they had never seen before. Something simple. Something revolutionary. Something called taking turns. The High Council chamber was chaos. Jake stood at the entrance and watched as dozens of Velhari shouted at each other across a circular room. Some stood on tables. Others paced back and forth, tails lashing in anger. The noise was incredible, a mix of hissing, growling, and voices raised in fury. Threx stood beside Jake looking tired. This is a good day. Last week, 3 council members got into a physical fight and had to be pulled apart. How do you get anything done? Jake asked. We don't. That's the problem. An elderly Velhari female with white fur and scars across her face banged a metal rod against a gong. The sound cut through the noise, and slowly the council members found their seats. The female's amber eyes fixed on Jake. You are the human ambassador. I am Elder Vex, leader of the northern clans. Coordinator Threx says you have a proposal that might help with our current crisis. Speak quickly. We have many arguments to finish today. Jake walked to the center of the chamber. All eyes turned to him. He felt like prey surrounded by predators, but he kept his voice steady. Thank you, Elder Vex. I do have a proposal. But I need your help with something first. I would like to demonstrate something to you, but I need you to bring your young cubs here. The council erupted in confusion. A large male with black fur and a military uniform stood up. You want cubs in the High Council chamber? This is absurd. We are discussing war and politics, not running a nursery. General Kraz, Jake said, remembering the name from his briefings. I understand this is unusual, but I promise what I want to show you is directly related to your conflict over the moon. Give me 2 hours of your time. If my demonstration does not help, I will leave Velhar Prime and never bother you again. Elder Vex tilted her head, studying Jake. You are very confident for someone who just arrived on our world. Very well, human. We will allow this demonstration. But if you waste our time, there will be consequences. 2 hours later, the council chamber had been transformed. Hundreds of Velhari cubs filled the space, brought by confused caretakers who did not understand why the High Council wanted children present. The cubs ranged in age from about 3 to 8 years old in human terms. They ran around, climbed on furniture, and made high-pitched noises that echoed off the walls. Jake had used the time to gather supplies. He had toys, games, and puzzles spread out on tables in the center of the room. Each item was different. Some were simple building blocks. Others were electronic devices that made sounds or showed lights. A few were traditional Velhari toys that spun or floated in the air. Let them play, Jake said to the caretakers. The cubs needed no encouragement. They rushed toward the tables, and immediately fighting broke out. 2 cubs grabbed the same floating toy and began pulling it back and forth, hissing at each other. Another 3 fought over a set of glowing blocks. Within minutes, the chamber was filled with the sounds of cubs fighting, crying, and screaming. The adult Velhari watched with bored expressions. They had seen this behavior countless times. It was normal, expected, natural. Jake let it continue for 10 minutes. He wanted the adults to see the full extent of the chaos. Then he walked into the middle of the fighting cubs and gently separated 2 who were rolling on the ground, fighting over a magnetic building set. Stop, he said firmly but not angrily. The 2 cubs froze, surprised by the intervention. Adult Velhari leaned forward, interested despite themselves. What was the human doing? Jake sat down cross-legged on the floor, bringing himself to the cubs' eye level. He held up the magnetic building set that they had been fighting over. I know you both want to play with this toy, he said, and you can both play with it. But you have to do something called taking turns. The cubs stared at him with wide golden eyes. One of them, a small female with brown fur, tilted her head in confusion. Taking turns? What is this? Taking turns means one of you plays with the toy for a little while and the other one waits. Then you switch. The one who was playing gives the toy to the one who was waiting. Then you switch again. Back and forth. Both of you get to play and nobody has to fight. The male cub's ears flattened. But I want to play now. Why should I wait? Because if you wait, then you get a turn. And if you don't wait, you just keep fighting and nobody has fun. Watch, I'll show you. Jake pulled out his datapad and set a timer. You, he said to the female cub, get to play with the toy for 5 minutes. I'll time it. Then when 5 minutes is up, you give the toy to him and he gets 5 minutes. He handed the building set to the female cub. The male cub's claws extended slightly and he looked ready to attack. But Jake placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Wait, just 5 minutes. You can do this. The chamber had gone quiet. Every adult Velhari was watching. They had never seen anything like this. Cubs being told to wait? It seemed impossible. Jake kept his hand on the male cub's shoulder, not restraining him, just providing a calm presence. The female cub started building with the magnetic pieces, creating a small tower. The male cub watched, his tail twitching with impatience. Every few seconds, he glanced at Jake's datapad, watching the timer count down. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. But finally, the timer beeped. Jake nodded to the female cub. Time to switch. Give the toy to him now. The female cub looked down at her tower. She had been enjoying herself. Her claws twitched, and for a moment Jake thought she would refuse. But then slowly she picked up the magnetic building set and held it out to the male cub. The male cub took it carefully, as if he could not believe this was really happening. He started building his own structure, and then something remarkable happened. The female cub began to purr. It was not the aggressive, possessive rumble that Velhari made when claiming territory. It was soft and gentle, a sound of contentment. She sat back and watched the male cub play, and she purred. The male cub's ears perked up. He glanced at her, then back at his building, and then he started purring too. The adult Velhari gasped. Some stood up from their seats. Others leaned so far forward they almost fell. They had never heard cubs purr like this while awake and near each other. Purring was usually only heard when a cub was alone with a parent or sleeping or eating. But these 2 cubs were purring together, calm and peaceful. even though one was playing and one was waiting. Elder Vex's voice was barely a whisper. "What magic is this?" Jake smiled. "It's not magic. It's just fairness. Both cubs know they will get to play, so both cubs are happy. Nobody has to fight. Nobody has to lose. Everyone wins." He stood up and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "I want to try this with all the cubs, but I need your help. I need adult volunteers to sit with small groups of cubs and help them practice taking turns." At first, nobody moved. Then Threx stepped forward. "I will help." One by one, other Velhari came forward. Soon, Jake had 20 adults sitting on the floor with small groups of cubs. He explained the concept of taking turns again and showed each group how to use timers. He moved from group to group, helping, encouraging, correcting when cubs tried to fight instead of wait. It was not easy. Many cubs refused at first. Some threw tantrums. Others tried to steal toys when it was not their turn. But Jake was patient, and the adult Velhari watching his method became patient too. They gently but firmly enforced the rules. Wait your turn, 5 minutes each. Share the toy. No fighting. Slowly the chamber transformed. The sounds of fighting and crying faded. In their place came a new sound, purring. First one cub, then two, then 5, then dozens. Within an hour, the entire chamber was filled with the gentle rumble of content cubs purring as they took turns with toys. General Kraz stood up from his seat and walked down to where Jake was supervising a group. His face was unreadable. Jake tensed, expecting anger. But instead, the general knelt down and watched a pair of cubs politely passing a spinning top back and forth. "This should not be possible," Kraz said quietly. "Our cubs do not behave this way. They fight. They compete. They take what they want by force. This is our nature." "Maybe," Jake said. "But maybe nature can be guided. Human children have the same instincts. They want what they want and they want it now. But we teach them different. We teach them to wait, to share, to take turns. And they learn. They're still competitive, still ambitious, but they learn there are better ways to get what they want than fighting." Elder Vex joined them, moving slowly on her old legs. She watched a group of cubs who were organizing themselves without adult help, setting their own timers and passing toys in an orderly fashion. "How long does this teaching take?" she asked. "For humans? We start teaching it when children are 2 or 3 years old. By the time they start school, most have learned the basics. But it's never too late to learn. Adults can learn this too." Vex and Kraz looked at each other. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding. Jake held his breath. "You think this can help with the moon crisis?" Vex said. It was not a question. "I think the same principle applies," Jake said carefully. "Right now you're like two cubs fighting over a toy. Both factions want the moon all to themselves. But what if you could both use the moon? What if you took turns?" "Impossible," Kraz said immediately. "We cannot share military control of strategic resources with our enemies. Then you'll fight, and many will die, and the winner will be too weak to properly use the moon anyway. Or you could try something new. Something your cubs are learning right now." Jake pointed to the chamber full of peacefully pell news of what happened in the High Council chamber, spread across Velhar Prime faster than Jake had expected. By the next morning, every major news network was talking about the human ambassador who had taught cubs to stop fighting. Videos of the purring cubs circulated on Velhari communication devices. Parents who had been at the demonstration told others what they had witnessed. Jake woke to find Threx waiting outside his quarters with a pile of message requests. "You are famous, Ambassador. Everyone wants to talk to you. Parents want to know more about this taking turns concept. Teachers want you to visit schools. Even some military leaders are asking questions. What about the High Council? Have they made any decisions about the moon?" Threx's ears drooped. "No. Elder Vex and General Kraz are still locked in their positions. Neither will compromise. The military buildup continues. But something is changing among the regular citizens. That is what I wanted you to see today." They traveled to a school on the outskirts of the capital city. The building was large and plain, with hundreds of young Velhari arriving for their daily lessons. The principal, a thin male named Vorn, greeted them at the entrance. "Ambassador Morrison, thank you for coming. I was at the council demonstration yesterday. What you showed us was remarkable. I want to try it here, but I need your guidance." Jake spent the morning working with teachers, showing them how to introduce the concept of taking turns to their students. It was harder than the demonstration had been. These cubs had not seen the initial example. They had years of ingrained behavior telling them to fight for what they wanted. Many teachers were skeptical, convinced it would never work with their students. But slowly, with patience and repetition, small victories emerged. A pair of cubs who had been enemies for years managed to share a learning tablet, switching every few minutes without fighting. A group of 4 cubs organized a game where everyone got equal turns. Each small success encouraged the teachers to keep trying. During a break, Vorn pulled Jake aside. "This is harder than I expected, but I see the value. Cubs who learn to take turns are spending less time fighting and more time actually learning. Parents have started calling me, asking if their cubs can practice this at home. But not everyone is happy." "What do you mean?" "Some parents say we are making their cubs weak. They say fighting teaches strength and determination. They worry their children will grow up unable to compete in Velhari society." Jake had expected this reaction. Change is always scary, especially when it challenges something as basic as how you raise your children. But ask those parents this: which cub will be more successful? The one who fights everyone and makes enemies, or the one who knows how to work with others and makes allies? Vorn's whiskers twitched thoughtfully. "A good question. I will share it with them." That afternoon, Jake visited a community center where adult Velhari gathered. Threx had arranged for him to speak to a group of parents and community leaders. About 50 Velhari sat in a semicircle, watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. A female with orange fur stood up immediately. "You are the human who is teaching our cubs to be passive, to give up what is theirs. Why should we listen to you?" Jake remained calm. "I'm not teaching cubs to be passive. I'm teaching them a strategy that humans discovered thousands of years ago. Cooperation is not weakness. It's actually a form of strength." "How is giving up what you want strength?" demanded a male near the back. "Because sometimes by giving up a little you gain a lot more." "Let me give you an example. On Earth we have these places called libraries. They are buildings full of books that anyone can borrow. You take a book, read it, and then return it so someone else can read it. Now I could buy all those books for myself and keep them, but that would cost a fortune and I would run out of space. Instead, by sharing with others, I get access to thousands of books without paying for all of them." "Everyone benefits," the crowd murmured. Some looked confused. Others seemed to be considering his words. Another female spoke up, her voice less aggressive. "I was at the demonstration yesterday. My cub learned to take turns, and for the first time in months she came home without scratches or bite marks from fighting. She was calm, happy. She kept purring all evening. I have never seen her so content. That's because she learned that she does not have to fight to get what she needs," Jake explained. "When cubs fight, even the winner gets hurt. But when they take turns, everyone gets what they want without the pain. Your cub felt safe maybe for the first time. That's why she was purring." More parents began sharing their experiences. Some reported that their cubs were teaching siblings to take turns at home. Others said cubs were fighting less and sleeping better. But there were still skeptics. An older male with gray fur and a scarred face stood up. "I am a retired warrior. I fought in 6 territorial wars. I survived because I was strong and took what I needed. If we teach our cubs to share and wait their turn, how will they survive when they face enemies? Not everyone will play by these new rules." It was a fair question, and Jake considered it carefully before answering. "You're right that not everyone will follow these rules. But here's what I've observed about human society. The people who learned to cooperate did not become weak. They became successful. They formed teams, companies, and governments that could accomplish things no individual could do alone. The humans who only knew how to fight and take ended up isolated and weak, because everyone around them was working together while they were working alone." The old warrior sat down, not convinced but thoughtful. Over the following weeks, Jake watched as the idea of taking turns and sharing spread through Velhar Prime like ripples in water. Schools began teaching it formally. Parents practiced it with their cubs at home. Community centers offered classes for adults who wanted to learn. Threx helped Jake develop teaching materials in the Velhari language, but resistance was also growing. Conservative factions argued that Jake was corrupting Velhari culture. Military commanders worried that soldiers who learned to share might become hesitant in combat. General Kraz gave speeches warning about the dangers of following human customs. Jake received his first death threat 3 weeks after the demonstration. Then a second. Then a dozen more. Threx increased security around him, but Jake insisted on continuing his work. If I hide, it proves their point that these ideas are dangerous, Jake said. I have to show that cooperation makes you strong, not weak. The real test came when Jake was invited to speak at the military academy, the institution that trained Velhar Prime's future officers. Threx was nervous about the visit. Military culture is even more competitive than civilian society, Threx warned. These young officers are taught that victory comes through strength and domination. They will not want to hear about sharing and taking turns. The academy was an imposing structure of dark stone and metal. Young Velhari in training uniforms watched Jake with suspicious eyes as he walked through the halls. He was brought to a large auditorium where several hundred cadets waited. The commandant, a scarred female named Rix, introduced Jake without enthusiasm. This is the human ambassador who has been teaching cubs to play nice. The High Council wants you to hear what he has to say. Listen respectfully, then return to your real training. Jake walked to the center of the stage and looked out at the sea of hostile faces. I know most of you don't want me here. You think what I'm teaching is soft, weak, useless for soldiers. But let me ask you a question. How many of you have worked on a team project that failed because team members fought each other instead of working together? Silence. Then slowly a few hands went up. Then more. Soon nearly half the auditorium had raised their hands. Exactly. You've all seen it. Teams that fail not because they lack skill or courage, but because they can't cooperate. Now imagine a military unit where soldiers know how to work together smoothly, where resources are shared efficiently, where everyone trusts each other to do their part. Would that unit be weaker than one where soldiers fight each other for supplies and glory? A cadet near the front spoke up. But in real combat, there is no taking turns. The enemy will not politely wait while we organize ourselves. You're absolutely right, Jake agreed. Combat is not polite. But the preparation for combat can be. Human military forces are some of the most effective in the galaxy, and you know why? Because we train our soldiers to work as a unit, to trust each other, to share resources and support each other. Individual strength matters, but coordinated strength wins wars. He spent the next hour discussing military strategy, using human historical examples of how cooperation and coordination had won battles against superior forces. He talked about supply chains, logistics, and combined operations. He showed how taking turns with resources like ammunition and equipment kept units fighting longer than if everyone hoarded supplies. By the end, the cadets were not convinced that sharing and cooperation were the answer to everything, but they were thinking. They were questioning their assumptions, and that was enough. That evening, Jake sat with Threx on the balcony of his quarters looking out at the city lights. You have started something that canny. The High Council chamber was packed. Word had spread that a cub would address the council, and everyone wanted to witness this strange event. Jake stood near the back with Threx, watching as council members took their seats. Elder Vex sat in her usual place, looking tired. General Kraz was on the opposite side of the chamber, his military uniform crisp and his expression hard. The tension in the room was thick. Reports had come in that morning of a minor skirmish between northern and southern ships near the disputed moon. No one had died, but shots had been fired. War was no longer a possibility. It was becoming inevitable. The doors opened and a small figure walked into the chamber. Lyra looked tiny compared to the adult Velhari surrounding her. Her brown fur was neatly groomed, and someone had dressed her in a simple white garment. She walked with her head up, not showing fear, though Jake could see her tail twitching nervously. Elder Vex banged her gong for silence. The council recognizes Lyra of the Eastern Valley clan. Speak, young one, and make it quick. We have important matters to discuss. Lyra walked to the center of the circular chamber. Her voice was clear but childlike, lacking the deep resonance of adult Velhari. Honored council members, I am here to tell you about something I learned from the human ambassador. General Kraz snorted. We know what you learned, cub. The human taught you to play nice with your toys. This is not relevant to council business, but it is, Lyra said, not backing down. The human taught me and my friends to take turns. At first I did not understand. I wanted to keep every toy for myself. But Ambassador Morrison showed me that if I take turns, I get to play with more toys, not less. And I don't have to fight. This is about toys, another council member grumbled. We are discussing the fate of our world. Lyra's small hands clenched into fists. I know what you are discussing. You are fighting over the moon like me and my friends used to fight over toys. Everyone wants it all for themselves. But what the human taught me is that sharing does not mean getting less. It means everyone gets something and nobody has to die. The chamber went quiet. Even General Kraz had no immediate response. The simple truth spoken by a child carried a weight that political speeches could not match. Elder Vex leaned forward in her seat. Go on, young one. Before I learned to take turns, I fought with my littermate every day. We would scratch and bite each other. We were always angry, always hurt. But now we take turns with our toys and our games. And you know what? We have more time to actually play. We don't waste time fighting anymore. We are happier. Lyra looked directly at Elder Vex, then at General Kraz. You are wasting time fighting over the moon. If you take turns like the human taught us, you could both use the moon. You would both be happier, and nobody would die. She stood there for a moment longer, then bowed her head respectfully and walked out of the chamber. The silence she left behind was absolute. Council members looked at each other. Some appeared moved. Others looked angry. But no one could dismiss what the cub had said. General Kraz stood up. The words of a child are touching, but the real world is not a playground. The Southern Collective cannot be trusted to honor any agreement about taking turns. They would use their time on the moon to fortify it and deny us our turn. This is naive thinking. And you would do the same to us, shouted a Southern Collective representative. You speak of trust while moving warships into position. You want the moon for yourself, just as you have always wanted everything for yourself. The argument escalated quickly. Council members stood and shouted. The brief moment of reflection that Lyra had created evaporated into the usual chaos. Jake watched with disappointment. The cub had tried, but years of distrust and hostility could not be overcome with one speech. Elder Vex banged her gong repeatedly until the noise died down. This council is adjourned. We will reconvene tomorrow to finalize our military response. She stood and walked out, looking older and more tired than ever. Jake left the chamber feeling defeated. Threx walked beside him silently. They returned to Jake's quarters, and for a long time neither spoke. Finally, Threx broke the silence. Do not give up hope yet, Ambassador. I know Elder Vex. That cub's words affected her more than she showed. And General Kraz, despite his words, looked troubled. Troubled enough to stop a war? I do not know. But there is something you should understand about Velhari culture. We do not show weakness in public. To admit that we might be wrong, that we might need to change, this is very difficult for us. But in private, away from the eyes of rivals and subordinates, we are capable of reflection. What are you saying? I am saying that perhaps Elder Vex and General Kraz need to hear your message in a different setting. Not in the council chamber where they must posture for their followers. Somewhere private, neutral. Jake thought about this. Could you arrange such a meeting? It would be difficult. Vex and Kraz have not spoken privately in years. They consider each other enemies. But perhaps with the right approach, using your role as a neutral third party? Threx's whiskers twitched thoughtfully. Yes, I think I can arrange this. But it must be done carefully. If either suspects a trap, they will not come. Over the next 2 days, Threx worked his diplomatic magic. He approached both leaders separately, framing the meeting as a final attempt at peace before the shooting war began. He emphasized that Jake Morrison, as a representative of Earth and the Galactic Council, could serve as a neutral mediator. He made no promises about outcomes, only that both sides would be heard. Surprisingly, both agreed. Perhaps they were tired. Perhaps Lyra's speech had planted seeds of doubt. Perhaps they simply wanted to exhaust every option before committing to full war. Whatever the reason, they accepted the invitation. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a small conference room in the human embassy building. Jake prepared carefully. No recording devices, no guards, no weapons. Just 3 people, coffee, which the Velhari had grown fond of, and a simple holographic toy that Jake had borrowed from the school. Elder Vex arrived first. She looked around the plain room with suspicion but sat down when Jake offered her coffee. General Kraz arrived moments later. His hand instinctively went to where his sidearm usually hung, but he had agreed to come unarmed. He glared at Vex and she glared back, but both remained seated. Thank you both for coming, Jake said, sitting down to join them. I know this is uncomfortable, but I believe there is a solution to your conflict that does not involve thousands of deaths. Then speak it, Kraz said bluntly. We are listening. Jake placed the holographic toy on the table between them. It was the same type that the cubs had fought over in the park during his first week on Velhar Prime. Both Velhari looked at it with confusion. This toy represents your moon, Jake said. Right now you are both acting like those cubs in the park, fighting over something, determined that only one of you can have it. But what if I told you that you are asking the wrong question? What question should we be asking? Vex asked, her tone guarded. Instead of asking who gets the moon, ask what you really want from the moon. Not what your pride demands, not what military strategy dictates. What do you personally want for your people? Vex was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer than Jake had ever heard it. I want my clans to prosper. The moon has minerals we need for technology, for building, for trade. Without those resources, we will fall behind other factions. Our cubs will grow up in poverty while others advance. Kraz nodded slowly. The Southern Collective wants the same: security, resources for our people. A future where our children do not starve or struggle. The moon represents survival for us. So you both want the same thing, Jake observed. Prosperity, security, a better future for your children. You are not really enemies. You are two groups with the same goal, fighting because you think there is only one way to achieve it. There is only one moon, Kraz said. Only so many minerals. If we share, we each get half of what we need. Jake picked up the toy and held it. But if you fight, what happens? Ships are destroyed. Soldiers die. Equipment is damaged. The moon itself might be harmed in the conflict. And when one side finally wins, they will be so weakened, so depleted of resources, that they cannot effectively mine the moon anyway. So tell me, General, would you rather have half of the moon's resources in peace or a quarter of them after a costly war? Kraz's claws extended and retracted, a sign of agitation. But he did not argue. Jake turned to Vex. And Elder, if you fight and win, the Southern Collective will never accept the outcome. They will resist, sabotage, rebel. You would have to maintain a military occupation of the moon forever. How much of your resources will that consume? How many soldiers will you need? How many could die in ongoing guerrilla warfare? Vex's ears flattened. She knew he was right. Jake set the toy down and pulled out his datapad. I have a proposal. The northern clans get exclusive mining rights for 6 months. Full access, no interference. Then at the end of 6 months, they withdraw completely, and the Southern Collective gets 6 months of exclusive mining. Then you alternate, back and forth forever. That is the taking turns concept you taught the cubs, Vex said. Yes, the same principle. And it works for the same reason. Both sides get what they need. Both sides benefit. And nobody dies. Kraz shook his head. It could never work. The northern clans would use their 6 months to build defenses and refuse till 3 weeks had passed since the private meeting. The Treaty of Shared Prosperity, as the Velhari called it, had been signed in a ceremony broadcast across the planet. Elder Vex and General Kraz had stood side by side, their signatures marking the first formal cooperation agreement between the northern clans and Southern Collective in over a century. But signing a treaty was easy compared to implementing it. Now came the real test. Jake stood in the orbital observation deck, a facility that offered a clear view of the disputed moon. Beside him were Threx, Elder Vex, General Kraz, and dozens of other officials from both factions. Everyone was tense. This was the moment of transition. The northern clans had completed their first 6-month mining period. Now they were supposed to withdraw and let the Southern Collective begin their turn. 30 minutes until the scheduled transition, announced a technician. Northern mining vessels are beginning shutdown procedures. Jake watched through the massive windows as the northern ships powered down their drilling equipment. Slowly, carefully, the vessels detached from the moon's surface and began moving toward Velhar Prime. Not a single ship remained behind. Not a single defensive platform stayed active. General Kraz stood rigid, his claws digging into his palms. Jake could see the effort it took for him not to order his ships to strike, while the northern forces were withdrawing. The opportunity for betrayal was right there. One command and the moon could be his forever. General, Jake said quietly, your people are watching. Kraz exhaled slowly. I know, the cubs learn from what we do, not what we say. If I betray this treaty, I teach them that cooperation is foolish. That violence is the only way. He paused. My daughter asked me yesterday if I was going to take turns like she does with her toys. I told her yes. I will not lie to my daughter. Elder Vex overheard this and made a sound that might have been approval. My grandson said the same thing. These cubs and their questions. They hold us accountable in ways our political rivals never could. The northern ships completed their withdrawal. For 2 hours the moon sat empty, unclaimed by either faction. This was the moment of greatest vulnerability, the moment when either side could break the agreement and seize everything, but no one moved. Then, according to schedule, Southern collective mining vessels began their approach. They moved slowly, carefully, as if they could not quite believe this was really happening. They landed on the moon's surface and began setting up their equipment. Still no northern ships returned. The withdrawal was complete. A soft purring sound filled the observation deck. It started with one person, then spread to others. Soon Velhari from both factions were purring together, the sound of relief and hope and cautious joy. It worked. Threx whispered to Jake. They actually did it. They took turns. The first rotation is done, Jake corrected. But this needs to keep working for months, years even, before we can say the conflict is truly resolved. Over the following months, Jake watched as Velhar Prime transformed. The taking turns principle spread beyond the moon dispute. Rival merchants agreed to share prime business locations on rotating schedules. Competing research teams began sharing laboratory equipment instead of fighting over it. Even the High Council adopted new rules that gave each faction scheduled time to speak without interruption. The changes were not perfect. There were violations and disputes. Some Velhari refused to adapt, clinging to the old ways. But the momentum was building. The generation of cubs who had learned to take turns from the beginning was growing up, and they expected cooperation as normal. They questioned adults who refused to share. They called out unfairness when they saw it. Jake visited schools regularly and was always amazed at what he saw. Cubs who would have been fighting a year ago now organized complex group activities with sophisticated turn-taking systems. Teachers reported that learning had accelerated because students spent more time studying and less time in conflict. Parents spoke of peaceful homes where siblings played together instead of constantly fighting, but the most profound change happened in how Velhari thought about themselves. They began to see cooperation not as weakness but as a form of strength. Military units that had trained in coordinated tactics performed better in exercises. Businesses that partnered instead of competed found new opportunities. Scientists who shared data made faster discoveries. 6 months after the first transition, the second rotation arrived. The Southern Collective withdrew their mining vessels on schedule, and the Northern clans returned. Again, both sides honored the agreement. The purring across Velhar Prime was even louder this time. Jake received a message from the Galactic Council. They wanted to know how he had accomplished what seemed impossible. Other species in the galaxy faced similar conflicts. Could his methods be applied elsewhere? He wrote a report explaining the concept of teaching basic social cooperation, the same lessons that human children learned before starting school. He explained how taking turns and sharing, concepts so simple they seemed obvious to humans, were revolutionary to species that had never developed these ideas naturally. The report spread through the Galactic Council. Ambassadors from a dozen worlds requested human advisors. Anthropologists wanted to study human child-rearing practices. Military strategists wanted to understand how human forces achieved such effective cooperation. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy shifted. They were no longer seen as just another mid-level spacefaring species. They were recognized as masters of social cooperation, a species that had solved problems most others still struggled with. On Jake's last day on Velhar Prime, a ceremony was held in the capital city. Thousands of Velhari attended, from powerful council members to ordinary families with their cubs. A statue was unveiled in the central plaza, depicting Jake sitting with 2 cubs, teaching them to share a toy. Elder Vex spoke to the crowd. Ambassador Morrison came to our world when we stood on the edge of self-destruction. He did not bring weapons or threats. He did not impose his will or demand we change. He simply showed us something we had never seen before. He showed us that there was another way. A better way. General Kraz, now retired from military service and working as a civilian advisor, added his words. The human taught our cubs first, and through them he taught all of us. We have been humbled by children. We have learned from those we thought we should be teaching, and we are better for it. Little Lyra, now a year older and more confident, was given the honor of presenting Jake with a gift. It was a holographic toy, the same type that cubs had fought over in that park a year ago. But this one was special. It had been signed by hundreds of Velhari cubs, each adding their mark as a thank you. You taught us to take turns, Lyra said, her voice carrying across the plaza. and taking turns taught us to trust. And trust taught us to work together, and working together made us strong. Thank you, Ambassador Morrison, for showing us what we could not see ourselves. Jake accepted the gift with genuine emotion. He looked out at the crowd and saw what had been impossible a year ago. Northern and Southern Velhari standing together peacefully. Cubs playing cooperatively, a civilization that had learned to cooperate instead of constantly compete. I did not do much, Jake said. I only showed you something humans have known for a long time. That fighting over resources wastes those resources. That cooperation multiplies what everyone can achieve. That taking turns means everyone wins. You did the hard part. You changed your culture, your thinking, your way of life. You chose to learn. You chose to trust. You chose peace. That was all you. As Jake's shuttle lifted off the next morning, he looked down at Velhar Prime one last time. The city stretched below him, peaceful and prosperous. Somewhere down there, cubs were taking turns with their toys. Adults were honoring agreements. Former enemies were working side by side. Threx had come to see him off. The Velhari diplomat, who had become a true friend, placed his hand over his heart in their gesture of respect. Safe travels, Jake Morrison. You have given my people a gift we can never fully repay. You gave us a future. You already had a future, Jake replied. I just helped you see a different path to it. The shuttle accelerated, breaking through the atmosphere and into space. Jake passed the disputed moon and saw vessels from both factions working side by side. In a few months, they would rotate again, and both sides would honor the agreement because they had learned that trust was stronger than suspicion. Back on Earth, Jake submitted his final report to the diplomatic service. The success on Velhar Prime had exceeded all expectations. A civilization on the brink of war had chosen peace. A species that had never known cooperation had learned to work together. And it had all started with teaching cubs to share their toys. The Galactic Council officially requested that Earth establish a new diplomatic program. They wanted human ambassadors trained specifically in teaching social cooperation to other species. They wanted humanity to share what they knew about building peaceful societies. Jake was offered the chance to lead this program. He would train other humans to go to different worlds and teach the same simple lessons, taking turns, sharing resources, building trust, working together. The fundamental concepts that Huoliv, or